how can I define someone if they're an addict? Like, what is it that considers someone to be an addict?
If somebody's actively in an addiction, they have to be a liar. You know, they're not showing up honest.
Is there such addictions out there that are like not common?
We can get obsessive and not have an addiction. I had an interesting experience, Vince, with the word obsession.
Show me how alcohol improves your life, and then I'll say, okay, then do it. But I don't see anywhere where alcohol improves anyone's life.
We all need to belong somewhere. And I think you are such an advocate for belonging. When I think about you, you advocate for, dude, you belong here.
How do people find purpose? How would you have a client find purpose if they're so sucked into some idea?
A lot of times people start with the why. Why am I so effed up?
Welcome to the Vinny Roc Podcast.
I took the blows and did it my way.
It's time. The Vinny Roc Podcast.
Welcome to the Vinny Roc Podcast. So this podcast, it's kind of gone through an evolution of things. As I first started was just regular conversations, but now as I've evolved into kind of a more mental health space, I've invited a lot of people that have interesting stories. And I'm leaning even more into bringing more professionals on here and just really asking questions. And I think it could be a good place for the audience to learn some different things that they might not necessarily have the opportunities to just run into if they're not focusing on mental health and wellness. For you guys who are in the audience, your audience, Kathy is the practitioner that I fall under in my internship in becoming a full-blown counselor for mental health, addiction, and everything else. So I've sat in on several of your classes, and I get off and I tell my wife, like, dang, she's so good. And I'm just really excited to talk today.
Nice. I am too, Vince. I am too. This is exciting.
So real quick, if you don't mind, can you just tell the audience a little bit of your background and then the company that you own and work for, and we'll just kind of dig in from there.
Sure. I spent 20 years in the corporate world before I became a therapist. And I jumped into therapy. The only thing I knew is I wasn't going to treat individuals struggling with addiction. And I have always specialized in individuals that struggle with behavioral addiction. So sometimes life throws you a curve and you realize it was meant to be. So I've been doing therapy for almost 20 years. Oh, that really dates me. I've been doing therapy for some time now, Vince. I own Therapy Utah. It's a place in Lehigh, Utah, kind of central Utah. We are trauma informed, which just means that a lot of times people can get a diagnosis and it's really not accurate because the trauma that they've experienced in their life is not taken in as a factor. So our entire team is a trauma informed team. They recognize the impact that trauma has on your body, your mind, your soul. And I love it. We have a fantastic team, and having you as part of it is exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting and scary, to be honest, because it's a world I'm extremely fascinated on, and the more I learn about it, I get more sunk into it. But then, I thought about being a tattoo artist at one point, and then I realized like that's permanent mistake, And then on the same side of being a counselor, I'm like, don't say the wrong things.
The nice thing about it, the longer you're in the seat, Vince, when you say something and it doesn't land, you just go, wow, that was a dumb thing to say. And they're like, and then you just correct.
Yeah.
So,
well, I was really interested in getting into this space because I tend to be I tend to be the person that a lot of people call when they're going through different struggles, and obviously I've lived a very experienced life. I feel like I've lived many lives in one, and so when they call me, I never wanted to be anything other than just like someone who gives advice. And then it started kind of getting deeper and bigger and bigger. And I realized I wanted to step into this space, but I had questions. And one of the questions I asked you the other day, and I wanted to kind of dig into it, was about addiction. And what I found is like veterans, for some reason, and it's not only veterans, but since it's a space that I focus on, veterans and first responders, a lot of us used alcohol as a form of, I don't know if you want to call it therapy or healing or distraction, but it was taught to us kind of like by your senior people, right? It was taught to us by the other gentlemen or, other employees that are like, hey man, rough day. Yeah, let's go grab some beers. And I think that sometimes gets a little out of hand. And my question was to you was what is it? How can I define someone if they're an addict? Like, what is it that considers someone to be an addict? And you told me, the 3 personality traits, I think it was something to the effect of they have a tendency to lie, to have horrible boundaries. And there was one other. Do you want to kind of break that down for the audience?
Yeah. If somebody's actively in an addiction, Vince, they're actively involved in it. They have to be a liar. They're not being showing up honest. They've got a secret. When we have a secret, that's telling a lie by omission, right? They have to be selfish. Like my addiction's going to come first, which means I may actually drink and drive because I had a bad night. I wanted to get away, had a beer or two. It went to beer to 5 or 6. So that's selfish. And then horrible boundaries is somebody that really dearly cares about their family. They want to show up for their kids. They have that family value of being there for their partner, their children, whoever. And that addiction sucks them away from that value. Meaning the horrible boundary is, yeah, I'll take you to practice today. Don't worry about it. Then you think, well, I'm just going to have a drink to chill. And then it becomes 5 and 6. And then you go, I can't take you to practice. And so that's what I mean by horrible boundaries. And somebody actively in that will have all 3 traits.
Yeah, those 3 traits are interesting. And I kept thinking about that. Like, I guess the question I have for you is that, like, I'm someone who tends to get, and I wouldn't say addicted in a sense because I just been really trying to flesh this out for myself, but like I get very obsessed with certain things. And, currently like I went to school, I went to 2 different schools to achieve 2 different masters at the same time because like my mind is like, I got to speed up the process of getting educated. And someone be like, man, you're addicted to you're addicted to putting a lot on your plate. And when I looked into that, I started questioning like, well, I'm not hiding it, right? I feel like we have really good boundaries in the household in the sense of when do I do homework, when I don't do homework, you know what I mean? And it's not a selfish decision because I'm not avoiding anything that I normally would. It's not affecting my relationship. But in the long term, it actually improves my family's position when it comes to potential finances. So I started to come to conclusions like I'm not addicted again to something, right? But the fine line between addiction and obsession, and how does someone kind of differentiate, like identifying that for themselves?
Well, you may be in what's called the fear cycle, Vince, where we fear like, I've got to go. I got to get this done. I'm, X years old. I've got so many years left on the planet. And if I don't do it quick enough, then I've wasted this time. So that fear could drive obsession and then control. Fear, obsessed, control is actually a cycle that people get into where if your thoughts are truly obsessive, they're very laser focused. They're very, this is a priority. I can't think of anything else. I can't, it's pretty isolating and dark. So we can get obsessive and not have an addiction. We can get obsessive in our thoughts. And if you think about it, I had an interesting experience, Vince, with the word obsession, if it's okay to share.
Please, yeah.
Early in my career, a young lady had come into my office and she was amazing, valedictorian, kind, just lovely, just a beautiful young woman. And she was in my office because she had started obsessing about her weight. She was not model thin. And she realized that this constant thinking about controlling her weight had become obsessive. So I just went over to the whiteboard, wrote the word obsessive up, and I said, well, what happens when you get obsessive? And, some of the things she said were, it's a dark place for me. I feel like I have to control. I have to have a solution, right away. This has to solve. In the process of talking to her, I'll just use the language that's familiar with me. The spirit just dropped truth into my psyche, like just dropped it. And the thought came to my mind, it's a counterfeit. And I'm like, wow, of course it is. To what? It was just this second in time, but it was so clean and pure, the knowledge that dropped into my mind. And the spirit said to me, to pondering. I had never thought about that. Pondering is a way that protects us. It allows us to consider things. Obsessing is a counterfeit way of thinking to the authentic way of thinking, of pondering. And so that sent me on a journey of really learning about the counterfeits in our life. And we've got so many. Over the years, I've got quite the list, and that's probably a whole nother podcast, Vince. But there is a healthy, protective way of thinking. And, it's interesting in your life story. And as I've started to read your book and you were traveling out to find those convicts that escaped, what I heard is somebody pondering. You were in a pondering state. You weren't obsessing about, oh my gosh, there was no sense of, I got to control. It was absolutely, if you read that part, it was you pondering. Am I doing the right thing for my family? What situation are we going to find here? It was very calm. You were open to a lot of solutions. And when we obsess, we've got one solution. This has to happen, and it's a time-sensitive solution. It has to happen now.
Yeah.
So you're probably far better at pondering than you even realize.
Yeah, I think that's probably, you probably nailed that, is that I'm really good at visualization of my life, but that's what I've done in combat. That's what I've done in sports. I think something I've done a lot of, and I don't know if this is necessarily okay or not, but I think of every scenario possible and then the counter solution to that, so that when it does arise, I feel very confident that I have an answer for it. And it's something that we do in the military called wargaming, like we wargame situations. So I'll look at an objective and I'll say, okay, here's the entrance. Well, if this one is closed, well, then here's the secondary, and we do this. And like in the event that we have a casualty, what is the first, if we have one casualty, we'll do this. If we have a mass casualty, well, here's the option. And we create this in our heads, but it's no different than what I've done in boxing and thinking about, like, I'm going to go into the ring and, I'm going to try and do a double jab. And if he counters, what's the next move? And as I'm kind of thinking about all the scenarios, I'm hoping that I'm knocking out the answer to each one, so that in the event that it does happen, I've already kind of played it in my head, so that hopefully my reaction is better. But I do this in life. I do this way too much, and not bad, but I'm saying this is a form of pondering, is what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And it allows us that space to be curious and the comfortableness with getting it wrong. You're looking for every option, but really what you're also doing is saying, what if we think the enemy's here and then we find out the enemy's there? We adjust. We don't freak. We don't run screaming for the hills. We simply adjust, but we need to know ahead of time the best ways to adjust.
Yeah. It's interesting. So another thing I wanted to ask you was, what is, when someone finds themselves in realizing they're using, say, alcohol, I'll just use that because that was my vice. But when they're using alcohol way too much, they're using it to cope. Well, what I've noticed is that I didn't realize I was using it to cope. I just was told myself, like, I just enjoy drinking. I like the way it makes me feel. And I later start to realize, like, wait a minute, I'm actually drinking and I'm masking, and you start to find it. So like back then I would tell myself, I don't trust a man who doesn't drink. And I'd say things like, there's nothing wrong. I don't have a problem with drinking. But slowly I started to realize I was definitely using it and I wasn't healing in certain aspects. And so it became a form of masking. It became something that I looked for excuses to do more often. And I started to do it in times when you're not supposed to be drinking. And so you start to realize, like, man, maybe this is a problem. So my question to you is there's a lot of people who don't know how to identify when it is a problem. There's a lot of people that say it's not a problem, but me would say, I can tell it's a problem. So how does someone come to the realization, like, maybe it's time for them to take a step back from this alcohol or whatnot? And like, how does that first conversation happen when they go see counseling?
Well, one way to look at it, because some people can have problematic behavior that has not reached the addictive level. Like, I work with individuals with sexual addiction, but everybody that looks at porn is not a sexual addict, even if it doesn't match up to their values. Did they go back to it? Yes, but did it reach that addictive place? No, not always. So we do have to be careful. Like, could somebody get a DUI and not have an addiction to alcohol? Yeah. He went out, he was pissed, he did some dumb things, or she got in the car. Absolutely. Doesn't make him an addict. They've had a really bad choice one night, right? So one of the things to determine is, does it take away from what you would be like to be doing? Like, if activities that you normally enjoy, have you stopped doing those and you're doing more of consuming the alcohol, or if it's a behavioral addiction, gambling or pornography? And if you take a look at an honest look at that, and it feels like, I'm spending my weekends drinking more and enjoying them less, and enjoying my people less. I want to just be alone with my addiction. If you start noticing that you're protecting that behavior more than you're protecting those you care about, it's reached the addictive level.
Yeah, you said behavior addiction. Is there other behavior addictions that are probably not common? Obviously, we talked about, you mentioned, addiction to porn or sexual addiction. There's other things like eating, right? I'm sure there's a food one, but how about someone who's overly addicted to something you wouldn't think about, like fitness or things like that? Is there such addictions out there that are like that, not common?
Well, in America, we don't even see the work addiction that we have. For us, I literally yesterday was having a dentist explain to me why he needs to work 85 hours a week, and just straight faced explaining it logically, like, obviously I'm building my bit, and if you went to Japan or France, what is wrong with you Americans? What are you doing? So lots of times our culture gives us permission to hide the addiction.
Yeah.
Spending can be an addiction. Financial problems can become an addiction. But again, if you have, a nice big wallet, it can be hidden by the fact that your finances are such that we can hide that. And our culture can say, well, of course they have 5 Lamborghinis. I mean, they can, but it's not healthy, So there's a lot of, I would say that behaviors can reach the addictive level when you prefer them over anything else in your life.
What's the first step for someone when they come to your office and they have an addiction? What is one of the first steps that you try and get them to I guess, make in their life that would help them start going in a better direction?
But the first step is really, it's get a safety plan. And you have a safety plan if there was, a vertical bar, and then the horizontal bar is risk. How well do you, when your risk goes up, what's your safety plan? Because if you're an addict, you're blaming everybody else. I was just acted upon. Wasn't my fault. My buddies came over and had a case of beer. How can that be my fault? I wasn't even going to drink tonight. They're the ones that came over. What am I going to do? Tell them I don't drink anymore? So you're acted upon, and you don't know what's going to happen in your day. So if one way to really quickly determine is somebody's behavior at the addictive level, ask them to create a safety plan. If they can follow their safety plan, they don't have an addiction. If it's just easy, if they say, Kathy, I realize I've got to be off the computer by 10 at night. I've got to start my day. I got to not take my phone in the bathroom. I did those things and it's working. They don't have an addiction. Where the addiction shows up is I made my own safety plan when I'm not following it. I don't know. I don't have the ability to follow it. I feel completely out of control. Okay, now then we're talking about somebody that has an addiction if they can't follow the safety plan they created for themselves.
I feel like I have go ahead.
They want somebody else to create their safety plan. They want a partner to say, well, you need to do this and this and this. So when it fails, it's on the partner. I did everything you said. So they have to own that safety plan. And you know what? We all do in life. When you think about it, we all do. We've got to own because I'm not going to know what keeps you safe. Vince, but when I ask somebody, where's your risky place? Late at night. Okay. They know it. There's a lot of questions that somebody starting a recovery, they really, truly don't know. What are you feeling right now? I don't know. That makes sense to me. What's the difference between fantasy and reality for you? I don't know. That makes sense to me. Where's the riskiest place for you to be? Oh, I know that. They know it. They know it. So you just keep working towards that, changing the worldview that my safety plan's on me. And then you start that process of what was the resistance to it? It's like earlier, Vince, you said about, I just like the way alcohol makes me feel better. But the question really is, what was terrible about how you were feeling? What was so bad about, I don't even know what I was feeling. Okay, that's real. That's real. No wonder you wanted to feel better than whatever it was you were feeling.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny that when I was drinking, I always looked for an excuse to drink. And I didn't understand that. And, when people said like, do you not like your sober self? And you're like, no, I do. But for some reason it was just a little easier just drinking. So
yeah,
I've been curious about, could my drinking have been because I've seen my father drink my whole life? Now I don't want to blame my dad for anything, but other than, it was a kind of a predisposition in my house of just drinking is normal for a man. I kind of say that I felt like a father as I drank my beers like my dad did for me. And, am I rooting some of my childhood, just experiences and just laying those over to believe that that's normal? And then I just kind of continue that process. Is that a potential thing?
Oh, for sure, Vince, for sure. And if your dad, and I don't know that story for you, but if your dad didn't share emotions, you also learned that from him. Or if he was the only one allowed to be angry in the house, you learned that from him. So the drinking was one thing you learned from him, and you interpreted it in a way that fit your world, But there was a lot of things that he modeled for good ending.
Yeah, my father wasn't like an aggressive drunk. I've heard the stories of his father, and his father was like a really bad, abusive man. My father was not. My dad was the type where like hand him a beer because he knew you were going to get this nice version of him even more, like get him another one.
Yeah.
And so like I wasn't raised in fear of my dad drinking. It just was a very common, he gets home from work and he grabs some beers and, he was a 4 to 6 beer a day kind of thing on a weekend, maybe a few more if there was a boxing match on, whatever the case. Nothing that I would call a problem. I wouldn't call it a problem because I don't think it felt like a problem to me. Like I said, there wasn't an abusive version of him or anything like that in the drinking side of things, and so like, I don't think I've ever been like an aggressive drunk. I've been in fights when I was drinking because like someone might've provoked it, but like, and when I normally drink, it was a more fun time for me. And so, I know a lot of people's actions as adults comes from some of the experiences as a child, and how important is that childhood trauma leading people into addiction?
Mm-hmm. It used to be that you could definitely say, look at the family and then follow the line, right? And that still holds true for a lot of addictions. Particularly with pornography, though, you've got kids that are in a great household, great values, family first, yada, yada, yada. And they're getting exposed to it through kind of, a back door. They're opening up their computer and finding it. So now I would say the shift has been that you're not going to always prevent having a really wonderful, stable childhood is amazing. And what a gift. I mean, my husband grew up in like a Leave It to Beaver family, for hell's sake. I mean, they were like, I always tell him, you are so blessed. You have no idea. But for this generation, their challenge is I can gamble in a minute. I can hook up, I can look at things. And so, yes, there is that population that they figure out really quick that drinking, for example, numbs them out. It takes the pain, the edge off the pain. When I was a teenager and started drinking, it was, Vince, it might have saved my life, straight up honest, might have saved my life. Because the thing about picking up an addiction is it's predictable. You know what you're going to get. You know the feeling. You know everything about it. And it becomes a safe place in your mind. It feels safe. It's not safe. I call it your frenemy because it feels like your best friend, but it's your worst enemy,
Yeah. The interesting thing with the veteran demographic in law enforcement demographic is that I've looked into this, and almost every single veteran who has taken their own life has had alcohol in their system. And, that alcohol is kind of the enabler in the sense of like that kind of, I call it like the fuck it button, where you're just like, fuck it, and these guys just make a terrible decision. And that's why I'm always trying to get guys like, I would look further into understanding why you even drink and why do you have to drink? Mm-hmm. We've created this culture where it's almost like the cool guys drink. So I want to fit in with that cool guy persona, and I want to be a part of that. And, I don't want to miss out the FOMO. Right. And, I've been trying to push really hard to hopefully change that perspective and see there's a lot of cool guys now that are going sober, and that's a good thing, right? It's become like almost a small cultural shift in the veteran and law enforcement community, and trying to get through to people to explain like, man, as much as alcohol might make you feel good, maybe that's a bigger reason for you to dig into that and seeing why, like what it is. And, I don't know what the process is for trying to get more of these guys to stop drinking, but I'm always looking for what's the answer that I can tell them, or what's the statement I can tell them to like, show me how alcohol improves your life. And then I'll say, okay, then do it. But I don't see anywhere where alcohol improves anyone's life.
Yeah. I mean, there's a subset that my parents were social drinkers, and it was such a non-event at my house. It was very appropriate. And a lot of people, I'm not one of them. I've never been a social drinker. It's just game on from the first moment. So I can never drink again, okay. Worst things in life to give up. So we all need to belong somewhere, Vince. We all need to belong somewhere. And I think you are such an advocate for belonging. When I think about you, you advocate for, dude, you belong here. Come in and see how you belong. And then once you feel that, go get somebody else and invite them in to belong. That's what you do best. It's a gift you have, Vince. And so once we can belong somewhere, we don't need the counterfeit. We don't need it anymore. But if they're resisting, a big part of it is, when you get to the core of it, is nobody will love me as I am. Nobody, they hear my shit, they hear my stuff, and it's game over. They really, really knew me. No, I don't belong anywhere. So I'm going to drink, because that is so painful not to belong. I can't tolerate that pain.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. I'm working on another book that I'm just kind of getting deep in my own life and trying to dissect and define a lot of the choices I made in my life, and I can contribute to some of my childhood traumas, and trauma might be I guess it's a term that most people would be familiar with and understanding when I say that, but there's some childhood experiences that have kind of shaped the man I am today. And it shaped me in a sense of I had to create certain personas to feel more confident, right? I had to kind of create this bro masculine man to feel confident, to kind of mask insecurities. And then later in life, I had some intimate relationships that were very unhealthy, and two parts. I was young and I was part of the problem. The other part was the counterpart was just as bad. And I created even more persona that to have to protect myself. And you start stumbling along in life with these characters you're creating to almost like a self-defense mechanism. Then it gets to a point where you're like, well, who the fuck am I really? And that became a really challenging part of my life, of trying to feel like, what do I represent? What do I mean? Like, what do I actually, who am I? And I think that was a very hard part, because I think it all came to fruition for me after my first divorce and leaving the military. It was like a big, well, who are you really? And I wasn't this Army Ranger, boom, war, kicking doors monster that I played for so many years because I had to, and I wasn't this, really tough exterior looking guy. I put more tattoos to look more intimidating. I was actually like a true like lover and fighter and father. And I was a lot more than I was giving myself credit for. And as I started to dissect that, man, I felt like a fish out of water for so long. And I think just now at 43, I'm really like comfortable with who I am. But I realized I was creating these versions of me that were more just kind of a protective layer, so that the world, couldn't see the true insecurity. And it took a lot of work to do that. It's very common in human beings, correct?
Absolutely, Vince. It's kind of similar to, like, imagine that you have a journal, but everybody else is writing in it. Here's what a real man does. He goes out, he works out in the gym, he drinks, he swears, he achieves Army Ranger level. Real men are tough. Real men fill in the blank. And all of these different stories. And then you go back and you're like, that's not my story. That's your story. And you know what? If you want that story, that I'm taking back my journal. I'm writing my story. I'm going to be the editor, author. No one's coming into my story and telling me what my story is. And that's what you did, Vince. You're in the process of going, who am I? What's my story? And getting those other authors and editors out of your journal, so that you can own the really parts that you love about yourself, and look at the parts that you're not in love with and go, what can I improve here? What can look different for me? It's that beautiful place of writing your own story.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing. Almost the number one thing I get from veterans when they're getting out of the military, even law enforcement officers, is, they want to find new purpose. And it's because the time in the military, it kind of gave him a purpose, because it's like, all right, now you work for the Army, and you do what the Army says, you wear what the Army says, and all those things. And you see guys in the military trying to find an identity outside of, the uniform. And so they dress, sometimes they dress over the top and very, flamboyant at times, just to kind of express I am an individual, I am myself, and when they get out of the military, they're still trying to do that. And what I found to be really unhealthy, I've talked about multiple times, like I feel like there's a path of really transitioning, getting out of the military and almost fully taking off the uniform. And there's a version of it that is unhealthy. That is like, they hold on to like, I am an Army veteran or a military veteran, and holding it so dear that it doesn't allow growth outside of that, because, a veteran persona is supposed to be a veteran persona. And, we call that kind of a bro vet, because they kind of coined the term bro vet because of the same kind of dude, and it's the number one thing that guys come to me like, I just need to find purpose. And like, I would be curious to ask you, like, how do people find purpose? How would you have a client find purpose if, they're so sucked into some idea?
Well, it's such a great question, Vince. Your brain goes to those deep ones, right? Part of it is start with the how and what. If I'm going to give up an addiction, or if I'm going to just go down this journey, what do I need to go down it? And how do I use what I need? A lot of times people start with the why, like, why am I so effed up? Well, if you start with that, you're going to hit your trauma and you're going to go back to alcohol because you have no skills. You're like, oh my gosh, that's probably why I'm effed up, And so you're going to go back to, you've got to do it with a certain cadence of, what do I need today? And how do I get through the day? And once you get some traction with the how and what, then it's like, all right, I need to drop into the why. I need to have a support group, a therapist, a fellow vet that understands his why. Now I'm ready to dip into that why, but I've got to have a lot of how and what days that give me some ability to go to that deep place.
Yeah. It's funny is when I made the choice to stop drinking, it ended up opening up some deeper wounds. And I felt like I almost took a mental 5 steps back, because I started to be like, man, what's wrong with me? And I've seen this in several other friends of mine where they became sober and life got a little harder for a moment. And I said, it's like, yeah, because now you got to face this motherfucker raw dog, right? You got to see the world. And what is it about that like, how do I help, I guess, would motivate guys to explain, like, yeah, life gets a little harder when you have to see it sober. I just don't know how to answer that for them sometimes.
Well, one way to do it is say, look, dude, the most important relationship you can work on is the one you have with pain, because recovery is going to be painful. And every time, you tolerated this much pain, and when it got here, you're drinking. It's like, I'm out. My partner was mean to me. There was, the traffic was terrible. The sun wasn't shining. It doesn't matter. Whatever was painful, it's like, when it gets here, you're out. Addicts have extremely low tolerance to pain, whatever that pain is. So it's like, all right, I want you to dive into pain. What's the most painful thing you could do? Show up at 8 a.m. for your kid's soccer practice. Yeah, that's painful, because you're not going to be sleeping. You're going to be, that's going to be So get in there and get into that pain and notice when you sit in that pain, if you can take any of the fear off it, if you can just sit in it a little while longer. And that conversation with your wife that you got to own, that you've got a secret credit card, that's going to be painful. Oh, that's going to be brutal. So you're going to need to have somebody, you're going to need to call somebody before and after that conversation, because you're going to need support. That's going to be painful to reach out to another dude and ask for support. That's pain. Get in as much pain as you can, dude, until your pain tolerance increases.
That's such a great response, because that's what I was looking for. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but like, yeah, it's because we've used alcohol or substances or whatever to avoid, or to kind of dull that pain for so long. Now we actually have to face it, experience it, like hold on to it and be accountable to it, right? Be accountable to that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of rescuers out there that go, as soon as as soon as he's in pain, I'm just going to rescue him from that. So you got to own that. And it's usually some partner work of going, you know what? It's okay for him to be uncomfortable. He's going to learn a lot more from being uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's a couple guys in my group that have been working through a lot of stuff. And, the men's group is, it's non-clinical. It's just like a mentorship, accountability / I don't even know, just community. And, there's, which is, I find to be, it's been very therapeutic for me as well to hear everyone else's stuff too and be like, oh man, like, I'm not alone. Right. And I think that's one of the cool things in those group sessions is because you realize how similar we all are in going through life and experiences and challenges. But one of the interesting things I've seen is that when somebody is able to acknowledge that there's some, maybe, some kind of issue with their father or their mother and how they were raised, and they finally acknowledge it, right? Or they come to terms with it. That's a heavy one for a lot of my men to kind of, I guess handle. It's a lot on the chin for them to realize, like, man, maybe, how do I be a better dad? I don't want to be like my dad. A lot of the men don't have father figures, right? And they kind of lean on the group for coaching and mentorship. But that's a tough one that I don't know how to, how do you, when they're having to come to terms with, they did have a bad upbringing. I don't know how to answer that because I had a pretty good one,
Yeah. Vince, it's about a lot of times, and I think a lot of therapists can be guilty of getting way too far ahead of where somebody's actually at. Like in that situation, if somebody really needed to have a tough conversation with their father, that's like Olympic level. That's like friggin' like, off you go then. So you're going to do the Olympics and it's going to be Saturday and you're going to, no training, no experience, no, it's just like, yep. And it's like, what in the hell are we doing? What you got to start with people where they're at. Like, who's the easiest person to show up real with? And it might be the Walmart clerk, like I can show up and genuinely ask them how their day was instead of getting pissed at them. I can shift there. I can do that. Let's start by, it's like if you're going to run a marathon, let's just go find the right shoes first. Let's not have you run a marathon Saturday. So you start them with the easiest relationship so that they know there's a path to the tough ones, but they're not required to do the tough ones today because they don't have the skills yet. But it's a yet thing, and they're going to get those skills. But let's start with the easiest relationship might be with your dog. I can take my dog for a walk. Start doing that. Start noticing how it feels to just love on that dog. Just love on him for the whole walk, So we got to meet people where they're at. It's so unfair, and I think it's cruel and I think it's why people a lot of times stop because somebody's saying, well, see you at the Olympics, and you're going, I don't know 3 feelings I felt last week. What is happening right now?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's good. I like that meeting people where they're at because that's something that, I think is extremely important. And it goes along with the lines of what I said is when people are transitioning, there's I said in my last podcast, but there's like this evolutionary thing from monkey to man. I'm like, people that get out of the military are pretty much monkeys still. We got to make them human again. There's a stage that we got to get them there, Yeah. Here's a relationship one for you. So the other day I'm sitting on the couch, no shoes on, and I decide like, man, I'm getting cold. I'm gonna go put some shoes on. And my wife's on the table doing homework with my daughter, and she goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm gonna go get some Crocs on my feet." No, I said, I'm gonna go to the room and get some shoes. She goes, "Okay, but where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to the room to get some shoes." She goes, "But where are you going?" I said, "To the room to get some shoes for my feet because they're cold." She goes, and we got into like, just like we're getting louder at each other, right? And she laughs and she goes, that's my question is, why do you need shoes? Where are you going to go once you get the shoes? I was like, oh my God. We almost went, we're just getting louder at each other. I'm like, I'm going to get shoes for my feet. And it was this funny thing. So this morning, again, I got up to go get socks on my feet. And she goes, where are you going? I said, we're not doing this again. And it was just this funny way of how men kind of communicate and women communicate, or in relationships, like how easily that could have. And now we don't get to the point really often where we're yelling at each other by any means, but I was laughing at the fact that it was a miscommunication that could have easily just turned like, what are you talking about? But the way I saw it was when she says, where are you going? Is in this moment, I am getting up to go get shoes. And what she's saying is like, well, where are you going? Why do you need shoes? Because where are you going to go after? And it was funny. And I imagine a lot of relationships get into some bickering moments just because of the wrong interpretation of a question. Is that correct?
1,000%. 1,000%. And it's not even a question either, Vince. It usually starts with body language, I'll say to a partner, can you tell the mood that your partner's going to be in by the way they walk in the door? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, by the way they open the door. Do you know what you're feeling? And then they draw a blank. We're just worried about their feelings. I don't mind. What do you mean mine? That's just theirs. It's if they walk in the door and it's good. So it's usually language is not usually the best predictor of how it's going to go. It's that body language we give to each other, that little where she might have picked up on just the slightest defensiveness from you. And then that might have triggered some little abandonment in her. Like, he's leaving me. I know it, And it's so illogical that you're still going with the logic. Like, what is going on? I'm getting shoes out of the bedroom. How are we even having a conversation right now? And she's going, he never cares about my feelings. He just doesn't care. So I guess if he's leaving, then he can go to hell. And you're like, wow, that was quick. That was quick.
Yeah, it's like those memes where they're in bed and it shows like she thinks he's thinking about all kinds of things, other women, and he's just thinking about like some kind of car.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, last night my husband came home late and I told him, hey, I did not sleep. I'm going to be asleep when you get home. No big deal. And so I heard him come home and he didn't come upstairs, and I texted him. I said, are you home? Because I thought maybe it was my kid. And he says, yeah. I said, well, clearly you don't care about your wife. And he's like, I didn't want to bother you. You're sleeping. And I said, well, you could have checked on me. Where did that come from? It was like, and because he was absolutely being thoughtful. Oh, she's asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets nutty.
It's a funny thing. Like, me and my wife have really good communication, but there's still always, I think it's just relationships, just naturally the small insecurities kind of spill out, and it's just what we do, and we're very fortunate to use humor a lot of times for these moments and be like, it's just like, whoa, that's not right. I meant it this way or that way. And, it's the healthiest relationship I've ever been in my entire life. And it's so funny because we do have good communication, and still things like yesterday in the shoes was just like, we're both looking at each other like, what is happening in this conversation? Where are we going? Oh my goodness. Well, I really appreciate, I know I just asked questions and I'm just throwing them at you unprepared. I know it's not easy, but I really do appreciate, Kathy, like you taking the time and just being here, because I want to do this often with you, because I do highly respect you, and I really enjoy how you approach a lot of the cases that you work with and some of the training that I've been able to, fortunate to listen to. And so I would love to have you on more often. And for those listening, if there's questions that you'd like to have answered on the podcast, we can do a second one. I think a relationship focused one would be very fun. I know that's a space that you definitely do work, because I know a lot of us men would love to know how to fix some of the communication issues that might be in relationships. And, there's probably even more deeper conversation that could be had about relationships in trying to build trust back in a relationship and other things. And I'd love to have you on more to do stuff like that, if you wouldn't mind.
be awesome, Vince. I'm passionate about how you're building your life and I'm emotional. Your commitment to our military vets is one of the highest, noblest things a person could do. And so you have my heart and you have my time whenever you need it.
Thank you so much. Kathy, you want to tell them where they can find you in your social media, but as well as Therapy Utah?
Oh gosh, I am so challenged in that way. I do have an Instagram account. It's under Kathy Kinghorn. Is that how you say it? Like, there's probably I think I'm up to 20 followers. Gosh, if somebody would follow me, my cute little daughter-in-law would be so happy because she puts things up. And I have a Facebook page, Kathy Kinghorn, I think is what it's called. But
no, you're doing good.
If you have a question, we have a therapist question box podcast, and you can go to the website and ask a question on there. So you can also ask a therapist a question there, and it'll be on our podcast. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yes, I love it. And, obviously, if you guys are interested in, if there's a substance abuse, issue in your life and you're looking for a counselor, I am interning at Therapy Utah. And so you can have me as your counselor in the support of Kathy, who monitors me in everything we do. So if there's any interest, I'm interested in growing and learning and working with others. And so please contact and let us know. All right. So thank you so much for listening.
Vince, don't forget about the group.
On Sunday mornings, correct?
Yep.
There you go. If you guys are interested, you guys join us. But thank you so much, Kathy.